From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
What makes the festival amazing are the attendees, that's all you guys, and of course the authors. And our next speaker is pretty amazing, Patricia McKissack. Pat has authored many, many books for young people, including a number, excuse me, with her husband Frederick, who is also here today. Yay! They are acclaimed works of fiction and nonfiction, and most limn the African American experience. As a child, Pat was enthralled with her grandfather's stories. She loved hearing her mother recite poems by Laurence Dunbar, and she grew up to pen her own lively tales, rich in rhythm and word music. Some of Pat's titles include Goin' Someplace Special, Mirandy and Brother Wind, Let My People Go, The Dark 30, and one of my favorites, Porch Lies. Pat's books have garnered prestigious awards such as the Newbery Honor, NAACP Image Award, and Coretta Scott King Award and Honor. In 2011, Pat has 2 new books, a picture book entitled Never Forgotten, with illustrations by Leo and Diane Dillon, and Cyborg, the second book in her Clone Codes science fiction trilogy. Pat is also one of the writers of the Exquisite Corpse Adventure, hosted online by the Library of Congress and recently published as a book. So if you'll join me in welcoming the amazing Patricia McKissack. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Oh, come on, people, we can do better. Good afternoon. I like the sound of that a whole lot better. My name is Patricia McKissack, and I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. Now, notice I said Missouri. A lot of people think I've said it incorrectly when I say Missouri, because most people think that Missouri is the correct pronunciation. Well, we weren't born in St. Louis. Fred, my husband, and I were born in Nashville, Tennessee. That's where we grew up, graduated from the same high school at different times, and Tennessee State University at the same time. After college, we married and then moved to our new city, and we heard people saying St. Louis, Missouri, and St. Louis, Missouri, and we wondered, okay, what's the correct pronunciation of our new state? Well, instead of asking around, we decided the best place to go to get correct information is the library. And so that's where we went, and we found a book about our state. The Missouras, the Native Americans known as the Missouras, lived in our area. They were traders who went up and down the waterways trading. In fact, Missouri means people of the big boats. And they were known by these large trading boats that they used. Pierre Leclerc and Auguste Choteau were 2 Frenchmen who came down up the Mississippi River, and they heard and spoke words that they heard the French way. So they heard Missouri, and in their tongue it changed to Missouri. Missouri. Missouri became Missouri. Now I ask you, which one is right and which one is wrong? The French pronunciation, Missouri, or the Native American pronunciation, Missouri. There is no right or wrong answer. They're just different. How do you tell Native Americans you're wrong for saying Missouri? How do you tell the French you're wrong for saying Missouri? They're both okay. And I don't feel wrong when I say Missouri. I'm just pronouncing it a different way if you say Missouri. And you know, I'm asked a lot of questions about writing and why I write. That's why I write. I write to tell the different story. One perhaps you have not heard before. One that people have drawn conclusions about, very often wrong. Ones that have fallen through the cracks. All kinds of reasons. I love to go find those stories and to tell them. When I was growing up, I grew up listening. Long before I was a writer, I was a good listener. My grandmother used to tell hair-raising ghost stories. She would start at the hour we used to call the dark 30. We had 30 minutes before it got all the way dark and the monsters came out. And we would ride our bicycles like crazy to get up on the front porch within the circle of light. And it was about that time she would say, there used to be a woman who would appear there under that street light. Oh, and she would walk in front of our house until she got to that street light. Now, wait a minute. She didn't have a head. Did I forget to tell you that? And when she'd get to this street light, she'd just vanish. And then she'd turn to me and say, Pat, would you go in the house and get me a drink of water? So I had to go in that old creaky house to bring her a drink of water. But I loved being deliciously frightened by her stories. And it was her stories that gave me the idea to write The Dark 30. The Dark 30 Southern Tales of the Supernatural. It was my grandmother that gave me that book. Another question I get asked was, what was your first book? My very first book was Paul Laurence Dunbar. Come to that front porch again, and I am sitting with my mother on the front porch, and she's doing Dunbar poetry from memory. Little brown baby with sparkling eyes. Come to your pappy and sit on his knee. What you doing, son? Making sand pies? Why, look at that bib. You's as dirty as me. And look at that mouth. That's molasses, I bet. Come here, Maria, and wipe off his hands. Ben's going to catch him and eat him up, being so sticky and sweet. Goodness lands. When Mama would finish doing Dunbar, I would beg for her to do it again. Please, please, one more time. And she would do it again. And then I would say, one more. That's all, just one more. And she would do it again. And when she'd finished, I would say, what? No. She'd say, go to bed now. So I'd go to bed reluctantly with the sounds of Dunbar's poetry on my ears and on my heart. So naturally, when I grew up and became a teacher, I wanted to share Dunbar with my students, and there's one here today who is my student. And I raise your hand where you are. Okay, maybe she didn't stay. But anyway, she was my student in 8th grade. And I wanted to give her Dunbar. I wanted her to know about Dunbar. They'd never heard of him, as I imagine some of you have not. But when I went to the library, there was not one single book about Dunbar in the library, not one. So I complained, it's a shame they don't have a book about Dunbar in the library. You know, I know why they don't have a book about Dunbar in the library. You know, there ought to be a book in there about Dunbar. And instead of whining and complaining about why I hadn't done something that I needed, I decided, write it yourself. Well, I'd never written a book before, but I practiced and I went to Dayton, Ohio to make sure that I had researched his life, and Fred and I read his poems from cover to cover, and I made my first attempt at writing, not for publication, but just writing for my 8th grade students. I gave it to my students that fall. They read it. Miss McKissack, one of my students said, "Who wrote this? It's a mess. It's a what? It's boring." And I said, "Who wrote it? You wrote it." I didn't want them to know that I had written something that bad. So I learned the first principle in writing, and that is, first, you have to tell a good story. If you don't tell a good story, no matter what you're trying to write about, young readers will just turn it off. They want a good story, and I didn't have one. So I had to go find some Dunbar stories, and I did. He walked to school with Orville and Wilbur Wright. I didn't know that. They lived around the corner from each other, and they had a printing shop. And they printed Dunbar's newspaper that he did for his church, called The Tattler. Now there is beginning a story instead of he was born. All right, so after many years of working on it, my students got to the place where they enjoyed learning about Dunbar. When I became a writer, I wrote about Dunbar. And that was my first book published by Children's Press. And I was delighted. It came from my mother and that front porch. Then my grandfather would take the stage, and he told stories about little girls who outsmarted foxes and captured the wind. And those stories became Flossie and the Fox, Miranda and Brother the Wind, going someplace special. So my background actually is in picture books and fictional novels and biography. And I had never, but when you ask, what's the favorite thing you enjoy to read? I would always say science fiction. And the kids would always ask, but you don't write sci-fi. And I go, no, I don't. I write another kind of book. And then it hit me, why don't you try to write a sci-fi? Never had I given it a thought, but I was an original Trekkie. I saw the very first Star Trek that came on, I think in 1964 or 5. And been a Trekkie ever since. My sons and I can quote whole scenes from Star Trek. And so I enjoyed it a lot. And then I read in the newspaper about a Supreme Court case. And it's called the Diamond versus Chakraborty Case. And it opened the door for me for a lot of what-ifing the future. They said that someone had manufactured some creatures made of organic material that ate the oil slicks. And they would not give them a patent because it's organic. The 13th Amendment is about organic people called slaves. Organ. Okay, so we said, boy, did they just open the door when they approved that to future slavery? Slavery of a different kind? Well, how do you have slavery of a different kind? And then I started reading the newspaper about cloning. Okay, what does that mean? Do they have second generation cells if you've taken cells from another person and then created another? What do you call them? Are they human beings? Thought, okay. Then I started really thinking about our space probes that are going out. And they come back with some creature that doesn't look like us, doesn't speak like us, doesn't move like us. Let's say, for an example, it looks like a rock. What would we do with that rock? Would we give it rights and privileges of citizenship? We would look at those things in a different way, I'm thinking. In the year 2171, we're getting ready to go into deep, deep space. We're ready now to go to the stars. We've got the spaceships built. We're able to bend time so that we can go through space at a much faster rate by 2171. But we are approached by the O. And the O are the gatekeepers of space, outer space. And they come to us able to see the past, the present, and the future. They exist in circular time. And so they are able to visit the past and the present and the future all at the same time. I've always enjoyed time stories because time is a fascinating subject, and it's going to mean so much to us in the future, and I believe it's going to have a great deal to do with our space travel. So I put all those elements together and envisioned what 2171 would be like. And now we have a world where clones are created by the Topaz Corporation. They're created and they are called seconds because they have second generation cells. And they're color coded and they're bald, and by just looking at them, they look like robots, but they aren't robots. But they have been trained to work within one specific area. And they do adult cloning, not allowing youth to grow and have a young life. There is no young life. As a clone, you're born fully grown, fully developed. Okay? And that's just the way it is. And you have clones, color-coded clones. Blue ones work for hospitals. Pink ones work with children. Yellow ones work in mechanics. And so all the various color-coded clones work for various corporations for nothing. And when they reach a certain age, 11 years old, when most clones dysfunction, and so they decommission them. In other words, they just kill them off. And then they have created a series of clone codes. And I'd like to share the clone codes with you. All clones are to be identified by number. The use of names is restricted, so we would not call a clone Alice or Mary. They're either 747, 898, 946, just depending upon what group you were made in, when you were created in. Okay? Clones have no rights under a court of law and are recognized solely as property. Now, the way I built the clone codes was to go back and find the slave codes that were used in the South during the slave period. Okay? And it was quite easy to reconstruct that with clones. Groups of clones in excess of 3 are not permitted without direct human supervision. That was a slave code as well as now a clone code. Attempting to educate a clone beyond its work model specifications is forbidden and punishable in accordance with Article 3C74. The manufacture of a clone in the likeness of a child is a capital offense. A capital offense. Imprinting the ability to mimic human emotions into a clone's behavior pattern is forbidden. A clone that disobeys a direct order must immediately be taken to a processing center for decommissioning. Instructing a clone to lie is restricted. Since clones are not citizens, they may not participate in any citizen rights. And so if you are a clone, that's what happens. That's the restrictions you have to live under. Well, the O has come to the earth and visited the past, the present, and the future at the same time and said, you are not ready to come out into space until you take care of this issue. And you also have cyborgs, and you also have entities among you that you need to know about and learn how to deal with, because you're going to see so much more when you come out here. And so the books, the 3 books, the trilogy, are about the 3 principal characters. The first one is Leanna, who was born. She's an infant clone. She was a baby. They have found a way to give clones a full life rather than the 11 years. So they go back and they clone her as an infant, and she grows up like any child. She's not been programmed by the Topaz Corporation. And so she grows up, and when she reaches 12, they know that it is working because she has not gotten sick. She has not begun to break down or disintegrate. So they know that you can now clone an infant and they can grow up like any other child. She's just as smart in school and is doing beautifully. But she's been discovered. She's been ratted out. She told a friend, and that's the last thing you do, is to tell a friend that you're a clone. And so here she goes. Her whole life now is one chase after another. She is now part of the Underground Railroad because I pulled that forward to the 21st century, 22nd century. Leanne has a good friend that she just met, and his name is Houston. And Houston is a cyborg. He was created because he was on a fishing trip with his parents and was horribly wounded and was going to die. And where he was, they could not treat him, so he was given artificial limbs. 3 or more artificial limbs gives you a cyborg. You're 3/5 of a human being, and so you are a cyborg. So Clone Codes then leads into the second book, which is Cyborgs, which leads us to the third book, The O. So now I'll ask, are there any questions? Any questions? Any questions at all?
When is the O going to come out?
In January of this year,
Yay.
of this coming year.
Okay.
Let me ask you this. How many of you have read the first one, Clone Codes? Okay. Well, I hope you discover it and read it. I think younger kids might enjoy it as well as teens. I think 5th, 6th graders will enjoy it as well. In fact, I get a lot of letters from 5th, 6th graders who read it too. And so that's 12, early teens, 11, 12, 13. Okay. Any other questions? Questions? Yes, right here. Okay. The boat capsized, and he was on the rocks, and his mother came in to save him, but he was beaten up on the rocks. Okay. Yes. Clones? I wrote it because I was a sci-fi enthusiast. I have enjoyed it all my life, but I never wrote a sci-fi. And at a conference much like this, the kid asked, well, if you like sci-fi so much, why don't you write one? And I said I'd never really thought about it, but I went home and thought about it. And writing, you just don't go home and write it. You really have to study the genre. And I had looked at a lot of sci-fi and read a lot of sci-fi. I love Ray Bradbury. But I never really studied how to write one. So I had to spend a lot of time analyzing how other writers write sci-fi and how they try to make it interesting, and trying to create a whole world that doesn't exist is not easy, and keeping it all straight. So I had a huge poster made, and I dated it and made a calendar of when things happen so that I could keep up with it, because it's not easy. Yes.
I had a question too, knowing that your husband Fred is here and that you write books together. Could you talk a little bit about the process by which you collaborate, and also share a little bit about what you might be working on together now?
Okay. People who ask that question usually are not asking, how do you work with your husband? They want to know, do you fight? How y'all write together? My husband and I can't get in the car at the same time. Well, we don't either. And yes, we do fight. But it is never about my idea is better than yours. It is, what's the best way to say this for young readers? What is the best way to convey the message that we want and not look like a message or not get preachy and didactic? And if Fred can show me that his idea is better than mine, then I let him win. But we've been working together 27 years. We've been married 47 years. So we just work together. We don't have to marry. We don't have to send memos when you're married to your co-author. We can wake up in the middle of the night and say, you know, I got it. We'll get it in the morning, all right? The book that we're working on right now is the trilogy to this, the third book. And it's in final copy edit. And we're so pleased that the last book is done in this series, and it really does work. We're delighted that the series worked, because when you start off, you have no idea of how you're going to make all this work. It's really frightening. So Fred and I, even though my name sometimes carries the book, I'm the only person on the book, Fred helps me to write even my picture books, because he's the one that does all the research. And Fred is not comfortable. I'll write, it was in the spring, and that's good enough for me. But Fred will say no, and he'll go off and he'll find that it was a Friday, October the 12th, 1826, where it took place on the something something, and it was raining that day. He is a genius when it comes to finding little bits of facts and where to go to get them. We rarely go any place that's a library involved that he hasn't called and talked to them at one time or another. And that's how we work. Oh, and John, too. I've got 3 sons, and all of them grew up working with us. Well, they're engineers and newspaper writers and special education teachers. But they all write as well. And John was the last one who said, wait a minute, everybody's written some with mom and dad except me. And so we brought him into the sci-fi because he is 100% my partner. And I enjoy him so very, very much because he's got tech knowledge that would have just gone right by me. But he understands the technical. By 2171, we should have conquered that. You don't want to do that. You don't want to go that way. You want to go this way, maybe. Or we should have this in place by that time, the way progress is going. So he was able to keep us from dating. Have you ever seen a sci-fi and you go, look, they're using telephones instead of cell phones? Or they're using the huge computers, big A-frame. Okay, someone else?
Yeah. Did you find it difficult to switch? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were here first.
How did you get Jerry Pinkney to draw the pictures?
I didn't get Jerry to do them. Jerry Pinkney was selected by my publisher. I live in St. Louis. He lives in Croton-on-Hudson in New York. I would not have known Jerry Pinkney if he walked right up and said, "How do you do?" I never met him. But my publisher, my editor, and the art director said, "We would like him to do your Mirandy and Brother Wind." And I thought, well, that's wonderful, but I don't know Jerry Pinkney. They said, "You don't have to know him. We need to know him." So I'd never met him till after Mirandy and Brother Wind was done. And then I met him, and we've been friends ever since. And he's done other books of mine. And it's very interesting when Jerry is talking about his books, and Jerry says, "And my book, Mirandy." And I'm sitting in the chair going, "My book, Mirandy? Mirandy is mine." You know? But no, it's a shared project between the author and the illustrator.
Sorry. Did you find it difficult to switch from the mindset of writing a picture book to the mindset of writing a much longer work?
Yes. Let me give you a case in point. One of the things that you have to learn is in a picture book is that you don't overwrite the artist. Miranda and Brother Wind became, it was spring, and Brother Wind was back. That's how it starts. But when I wrote, it was spring in Ridgetop, and the wisteria was bloomed, and all these plants that bloom in the spring on Ridgetop, I was careful that they didn't bloom at different times, but at the same time. And Mama had taken out the blankets to air and the quilts to air, and she'd beaten the rugs to get the winter dust out. And it just went on and on and on about it being spring. Well, my editor took her pencil, her little blue pencil, and she scratched all of that out. And when it was spring, and Brother Wind was back, and all that was taken out. But if you open the pages to Mirandy and Brother Wind, the first page has all the wisteria blooming, got the quilts on the line, Mama's beating a rug. All of that I wrote about was on that first page. The artist knew to do that. He didn't need my words to tell him that this is what he needed to illustrate. That's where we get into trouble, and why they don't let artists work with illustrators, or illustrators work with authors, is because we want to tell the illustrator what we want them to illustrate. And you shouldn't do that. It's up to the illustrator to bring his or her genius to the project. And if you're a new author and you're just coming into it, don't send artwork. Don't send artwork. It's the badge of a beginner. They will choose the proper illustrator for your work. Okay? Well, we've got 5 more minutes. Yes.
My sister wants to know what your favorite book is that you've written.
Okay, she wants to know what's my favorite book that I've written. I have 3 sons, 5 grandsons. No, 4 grandsons and 1 granddaughter. Ta-da, we finally got her. But that's like asking which one of them I love the most. And no, it's not my granddaughter. All the books that I write are my favorite. The one I'm working on is the one that calls for my attention. And so that's what I'm doing now. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. It's woven throughout, but I want the kids to find it. It's in there. But I don't like to be preachy in my books. So they may not get it right away, but they'll go, oh, that's not right, because that was like in that book. They would have forgotten the title. They would have forgotten it, but when it hits them, they'll go, oh, that's coming to no good. Yeah, so, yeah, I hope I plant a seed. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just delighted to meet you because my son was, when I came in, you were talking about illustrators. My son was one of your illustrators.
Really?
Yes. My son attended Suitland High School in Maryland, and he became one of your illustrators after he graduated from the School of Visual Arts. And so we're very excited to see you and very excited to be here. And
Oh,
we
what-
have some of your books that he illustrated
What's
with us.
his name?
Gordon James.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. A proud mama.
Very proud.
Proud mama. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
And the books you wrote were for the younger children, and I'm also an elementary school teacher. And
Yes.
they are fantastic and covering the part of the history that younger children might be missing in such a way that they really get it. And I've used it in my classrooms as well, and I just really appreciate what you've done.
Thank you so much. That's beloved. That is, those were my beginning readers. Well, they were young first novels, and they're just, thank you again for that. Boy, it's good to know. 2 minutes. We got 2 minutes, people? So I can take another one? I'll leave you then with a story. You know, I love stories, and storytelling is what I enjoy doing the most. But sharing a good story is a way of bringing people together. You know, whenever you find yourself in a situation and it's uncomfortable or people are big fidgety or whatever, just think of a very, very good story to tell. Many years ago, my husband and I sat at our favorite place called the Waterfall in St. Louis Forest Park. I was crying, and he does not like to see me cry. But I was being, it was corporate where I worked, and I was kind of being pushed out of my position. I saw so many things go on, and I didn't want to stay and continue. But I was afraid of doing anything else. I was afraid. I didn't want to go back to teaching. So Fred was in civil engineering, and he had his own construction company, and he too was kind of out there. So we went to our favorite place, and he said, well, Pat, if you could do anything in this world, don't worry about money, don't worry about place or time, just if you could do anything for the rest of your life, what would it be? I said, I'd like to write a book for children, just one. And he said, okay, you go do that and I'll help you. That was 27 years and 100 books later. And here publicly and quite open, I'd like to thank my husband for being right here with me all those years. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.